Hello and welcome to the Recursive podcast. An engineer by calling, an entrepreneur by accident. That's how our next guest describes himself. Kosta Jordanov is the co-founder of FITE, a global pay-per-view platform for combat sport events. With more than 5,000 streamed events and over 10 million users, FITE became the top-grossing app in the world across all categories. In 2021, the streaming platform was acquired by the US-founded TrillerNet, which counts celebrities like Metallica, Snoop Dogg, Lil Wayne and Pitbull among its investors. Together, they are now preparing for their public offering debut in NASDAQ. Kosta Jordanov, welcome to the Recursive podcast.
Great to be here.
I've already had a massive discussion with you, like 3 hours long, which helped me a lot to prepare myself for our meeting today and switching from our native tongue to English. I would like to start from your perspective 1 year after this merger, more or less. What has changed for you, for the team? Can you reflect a bit going through the entire process of becoming from FITE, becoming a TrillerNet?
Operationally, we actually not much changed since we kept kind of the whole team, same management, same strategy, same brand. And FITE remains a separate legal entity that is pursuing its own vision. And that was one of the reasons why we picked Triller amongst the 4 pursuers that we had at the time. They were the ones that shared our vision of what we're building, and they were there just to kind of support and accelerate this vision, as opposed to merging our team within their team. So FITE has relative independence still as a business, continues to operate on the same trajectory. What changed significantly is the opportunity for us to be way more aggressive when it comes to content acquisition. Now we have the backing of a much bigger company. If in the early days of FITE we were essentially limited by how deep were our pockets when it comes to content acquisition. And this was the reason why we focused on the pay-per-view model initially, because these are generally revenue share-based deals. Now being part of Triller and with Triller going public, we have access to much more resources to go after the really premium sports content out there, not necessarily combat sports. Actually, within 3-4 weeks, we will be announcing a huge deal that we signed for one of the most premium sports rights in the world. That will be exclusively on FITE.
Wow, can't wait to hear more about this. So you're now heading into this IPO with Triller. Already mentioned some of the details. Can you just share some things about the preparation for such a big move?
I already had a little bit of experience with public companies from listing Pionor on the Bulgaria Stock Exchange in 2007. This now is a kind of different experience and a different scale, since we're now going public on NASDAQ. And also the process, it's not a typical IPO, but it's a public transaction. Essentially, it's a reverse merger with a public company, sea change. And it's kind of it's quite complicated and a big deal that took some time to be structured. And we filed the so-called S4 filing 3 weeks ago. So we're on the last mile of kind of finalizing the process, and Triller will soon be a public company on NASDAQ with the ticker ILLR.
Awesome. One of the things that always amazed me about FITE was that you didn't go local. You basically went directly into the US market. And can you share some lessons on what does it take for a company from small Bulgaria to be that successful on US soil, which is where the big boys play?
I don't think we had a chance we had an option to go with the local market first, because it's so different when it comes to media. There are startups that enjoy their local environment being very similar to the global one. It's not the case in media. So for us to be successful, we had to go global from day one. And there was this external push. These are the markets that are used to pay for content, that the pay-per-view model is well established, and all of that. Getting there was, in terms of establishing, I mean, in general, just establishing a global brand. I think at a certain point in time, you have to go to the US, regardless where you start. And we've seen this with pretty much every huge, successful international company. So for us, it was, again, no-brainer that we should start there. We already had a little bit of experience and some roots in the US, so it was not starting from scratch. And then the probably the most important factor for us was to hire experienced people from the market that we're going after. Because originally we had a very, very strong tech DNA. Right? Kind of this is the core of the company. And this is great, but then we turn out to be in the media business. And in media, we need people who know the execs in media, who've been in that space for a long time, who could do the kind of high-profile deals that we're going after. And this required hiring experienced people in the US. And I think this was probably by far the most important step we did for the growth of FITE. Our actually first hire and currently COO of FITE, Mike Weber, comes from WWE. Our SVP events comes from UFC. So people who are well immersed into the media space, and even more specifically in combat sports, where we started. So I think this was critical, and it's not always easy in the beginning. But once you kind of put the right couple of people initially, everything started to kind of fall in places because they know other people. We started growing FITE, and more people kind of started seeing the brand and what we're doing. So actually, most of the next hires came to us, including people from competitors, from partners, who just kind of thought we were building something meaningful.
You had this amazing for the local tech ecosystem deal with Triller, but during the time that you were explaining, you said that you shared a vision, you felt like you are your own entity and pursuing whatever was important for you from the get-go, more or less. And now you're talking about like getting some really top talent into your culture and organization. How do you fit such a, like, in a way, these people have egos because they're so higher in their own professional lives. So how do you get them in sync with your team's vision and the way that you're growing a company from basically 2 people to?
But most experienced people who join the team actually already kind of share the vision. And again, if you look at our top employees in the US, there are people who have seen the media space evolving. Some of them from the times of closed circuits through pay-per-views, through starting to move stuff to digital. So they already were seeing that where we're heading is where the market is heading, which is essentially shifting everything from cable and satellite to digital, building more immersive digital experiences. And again, it was relatively easy because they already were kind of seeing this thing. And they thought that we were one of the companies that is on the right trajectory, and joined us. And again, it's because replicate again and again with multiple people. I mean, a couple years ago, we opened our UK office. We actually hired a very senior executive from ITV, one of the biggest commercial stations there. So, and these were people that we already have. We worked with them and collaborated with them on multiple projects. So they saw our vision. They saw also our capabilities to execute. Because many teams have great vision, and especially in our space, many teams failed. So they thought that we kind of have a really good shot.
Is this the perfect way to find suitable teammates, to work with them so they can see what you're doing, you can see what their capabilities are, and then get on the same boat?
In our case, it happened like that with most of the people that are on the team. Actually, probably with like more than 90% of the people I have worked previously, including within FITE. Even with Mike, we started with a small consulting project. This was at the time when we were essentially doing a pivot from a kind of a wider value proposition to a much narrower one that is focused on sports and initially on combat sports. And we did a research of the space to see what is the right space for us. And Mike was a big part of this research. And this was how we started collaborating closely. And we felt that, yeah, there's something that we could build together. Yeah. That probably none of us can do independently.
Can we elaborate a bit more about like getting this broader value proposition that you're having, and then finding the right niche where that product is the perfect target to aim at? How did you start?
It's somewhat related to your previous question regarding how you go global with the service. I think one of the things that is almost required is to have a niche enough offering. I mean, if we try to be YouTube and go to the US and try to build a competitor of YouTube, that's really hard to do. There's already an established player. And the way to go around that is to have a more niche offering so that it really resonates with some audiences more than the more generic offering does. For us, this niche was combat sports initially and sports in general. And this allowed us to, through this focus, to build a brand that is kind of recognized by people who are in this space, who are passionate about this space, to realize that somebody is building something for them, which is very, very different than just a generic video platform, upload whatever you want, cat videos, combat sports, you name it. And I think through this focus, and this is the focus of the product, the brand, the content acquisition, everything, was what was very important for our growth. And back to your question regarding the transition, initially we didn't know better, so we started wider than that, and offering all kinds of content to all kinds of audiences. Pretty quickly we realized that this is not sustainable, and we will not be able to create the necessary engagement to drive growth and monetization. And that was the time when we started looking at what are the possible niches for us based on our experience, our data, as well as our analysis of the market. And Mike, this was the analysis that I mentioned that Mike was a big part of. And we focused on sports for the good reason that it's one of the content that creates the most engagement out there, by far. And number two, we focused on combat sports because this is where the pay-per-view model is really very, very popular. And pay-per-view allowed us to enter a space essentially on the revenue share-based deals, as opposed to spending hundreds of millions to acquire soccer content and go after these audiences. And actually, this is the transition that we're doing now. This is the next transition, going from the pay-per-view to actually going after the premium sports rights, acquiring the rights upfront, and then fuel our continued growth.
I was waiting to hear number three, like doing something that you love, basically combat sports. You've been doing karate for 8 years, and after that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is like growing and growing. We've already had this conversation, like why were you FITE not aiming at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but there's a competitor there in the niche. So how cool it is to work on something that you love and you're passionate about?
Passion goes without saying. I mean, we're spending so much time with our professional lives that we're not passionate about what we do. It's a waste of time. With FITE, I was able to connect the dots between two of the things that I love. One is technology and being on the forefront of technology, and we're now introducing AI stuff and thinking about immersive experience and meta and all of that. And the other thing is combat sports, which, as you mentioned, has been part of my life for essentially the whole of my life. So yeah, it's great.
Awesome. One of the most prominent US venture capital investors, Tim Draper, was onboarded on the mission of FITE, and you approached him by cold emailing. How is this possible?
How stupid we are.
Be brave, so brave, like small company out of Bulgaria to approach Tim Draper by email.
We didn't know better, and there was no ecosystem really here in Bulgaria. Next time I do it, for sure I will go to the local funds first and try to do my first round with them. It will be so much easier. And then, of course, they now have co-investments with all of the major funds, so you could get them much warmer investments, interests, and kind of get to even the bigger investors. And this is actually what happened with our Series A investor, Early Bird. They were introduced by LaunchHub, which was our seed investor. But even before that team joined, essentially, as you said, on a cold email, couple meetings over the course of a year and a half, and we managed to intrigue him enough to say, this is something interesting, I will invest and let's see what happens.
Can you share a bit more about the story? Because I know it's very funny, because you actually said, yeah, we won't be coming now, we'll be coming in a couple of months.
We were a little bit conscious about our spending at the time. So it was small team, small budget. We sent a cold email to a bunch of angel investors. one of us found an email list of angel investors, and we didn't know better, so we said, well, let's spam them. But worst case scenario, we'll be the same place where we are today. But who knows, maybe something will happen. So it was not a lesson learned how to approach investors, but this was probably a lesson learned about always try to do something. I mean, if you don't do anything, nothing will happen. So at least try to provoke your luck in a way. So we sent this essentially spam to a bunch of investors. And one of them was Tim Draper's father, Bill, who forwarded the email to Tim with brief note saying, check this out. Then Tim dropped us another short note. This is interesting. Come meet me. And our response was like, yeah, we didn't say this, but essentially it was, let's put together more meetings. We cannot come to California just for you. Let's try to organize a few more meetings, which took us like another 2-3 months.
Bold move.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, this did not, usually with a deal, you know how it is, you have to use the traction and do everything you can while it's still hot, and like 2 months later, who cares, maybe. In this particular case, it kind of worked, and we actually managed, surprisingly enough, through this cold email and a couple of more similar tactics, do meetings with kind of 5-6 of the really, really good VCs over there. I think part of that was because we already had some initial traction in terms of user numbers and kind of reviews on the App Store and all of that. So probably this was getting some attention. And yeah, so that was our first interaction with Tim. At that interaction, he essentially said we would demo the product. At that time, it was quite focused on something that is now only a part of the value proposition, which is the ability to stream to connected TV screens without any hardware. So essentially from the mobile handset, cast to a connected TV screen. Nowadays, this is not magic. There's Chromecast, there's Apple TV and all of those. Back then, it was a magic because this was before Chromecast. Some investors were actually quite impressed when they saw the demo. And Tim said, this is great, but actually you just have a good tech, but where's the content, where's the user, and kind of where's the actual engagement, not only the... Actually, when we met him, it was even before we had any impressive engagement. So essentially he said, go back home, work a little bit more on that, and touch base in a couple of months. Yeah. And that's what we did actually more than a year later. We went with a very different numbers, kind of very different story. Same underlying product. Took him one meeting, and he said, great. Talk to Joe about the terms.
I want to get back on one thing that you said, and I think it's crucially important, because I had a story with my friend Hristo Nechev, who was raising capital in the Silicon Valley, shake hands with someone. We had the investment for what they were doing at the time, flew back to Bulgaria, started working on it, and then in 1 month's time, the deal was off, and he was not there to pursue it. And you said, like, when there's traction. So can we just quickly elaborate on that? Like being brave enough to say, okay, we need some time to work on this, and or when do we say, okay, we're coming right away? Like tomorrow we're catching the flight.
Actually, this is probably pretty rare what you shared. Usually when you have a term sheet, very, very few investors will back away from a term sheet. It's not good for their image, and they usually do enough pre-due diligence before they offer a term sheet. So this is a rare scenario. I think in most cases, if you have a term sheet from a reputable VC, you're good to go. And the rest of the due diligence is, if you haven't done anything funny with the numbers, the rest should be pretty straightforward. In our case, I don't think that this was kind of big, a matter of how bold we are. It was probably a matter of how stupid we are. I don't think we realized that we don't have that many shots from where we were coming. And we thought that, hey, there are tons of other investors, and we're building something great. And if team is not interested in 2-3 months, what the heck, others will be.
Yeah. Draper Uni is probably one of the places that you can meet every one of the top 10 best entrepreneurs in the States or in the world. So can you briefly describe what the experience is like?
I spent 3.5 months, 3.5 years at the co-working space that Tim Draper has put together in San Mateo, right across Draper University. So I was not part of the university program. but we had a chance to participate in some of the lectures. And as you could imagine, Elon Musk was pretty often down there with Tim Big, one of his first investors and backers and supporters, as well as many of the big names.
Great. It sounds like an amazing environment. And now getting back to our local environment, it is Southeastern Europe. You mentioned how important it was for you when the early bird investment came in through Launch Hub. So now we have more and more local capital here for development of tech companies. How is this affecting companies that are following FITE's path, like growing and aiming at the world?
Mm-hmm. It's really great to see how the whole startup ecosystem has evolved over the last, call it 10 years, but really in the last 5 years. And what the VCs, the Bulgarian VCs, managed to do in a relatively short period of time is pretty amazing. Now we have a unicorn, and we have many other successes, and they have strong pipeline. And we see also as important part of the ecosystem, entrepreneurs helping other entrepreneurs, and all of that, and becoming angel investors, and all of that happening within a very short period of time. I think being a startup today is much easier in a way. From the perspective of fundraising than it was 10 years ago. When we did our kind of first funding for anything really, way before FITE, there was no ecosystem here. I would not have went, even for FITE, I would not have reached out to Bill and Tim Draper if there was a better option here. So I think the access to capital is very important. This is one of the important components for us to see more successful companies coming out of Bulgaria. We now see that actually 2 of the funds just closed their new rounds, over 70 million euros. These are significant amounts of money that are starting being deployed in our ecosystem here. And I think this is actually very important for not only for kind of IT and startups and all those cool stuff. I think it's important for Bulgaria. I think this is one of the not that many niches that could actually drive growth. Financial growth and economical growth, and that could change our society for good.
I do believe that too. It's this entrepreneurial and added value way that companies like FITE and Payhawk, and I'm pretty sure that more unicorns are coming after them. So
for sure.
Okay, you said that you focused on probably like the most engaging entertainment, which is sports, in a way. Mm-hmm. How are artificial intelligence and machine learning transforming this industry, this business? Mm-hmm. Because for me as just a regular watcher of Formula One and some like jiu-jitsu matches, mm-hmm. It's very interesting to me to understand how the tech works and where is it heading to.
If you think about it, the vast majority of what we consume today as consumers is being fed by machine learning and AI, which is changing the society for good and bad, and I would say even the human civilization. So we are afraid that AI will come in the form of Terminator and will kind of change the world, but it's actually already changing the world in a very kind of different and more subtle way. Everything we consume, which is kind of forming our thoughts and everything, from YouTube to TikTok to Netflix to all of the media services, the vast majority of viewership happens through recommendation engines, and even more so in social. And many people would argue that some of the things that we see, such as the polarization in the society, is also an impact of this thing, with kind of the editorial and journalism having a little bit less role, and then AI feeding most of the information. When we go specifically to sports, it's not much different. And for FITE, this was one of the important steps in our product evolution, was to find the right recommendation engine. And we started with some of kind of the standard approaches that are being used in movies. There are tons of even kind of ready solutions trained on the IMDb database and all of that. Turn out it's not very suitable for sports. Sports have a very, very different life cycle. A movie is relevant even a year later, maybe even 5 years later.
Even more sometimes.
A boxing event is not relevant the day after. I mean, you want to watch it live and nobody cares the next day. You're thinking about the next one. So this means that the recommendation engine should work in a very different way, should take into account the different life cycle of the content, and we had to build something proprietary.
Is there a way, you already mentioned the feeds and like how we are thinking about, like the system more or less helps us think more of what we really like already. How is this creating lasting changes in the habits of the human population? Because it sounds very negative, because you keep, you do not widen your scope, you're just narrowing it.
I didn't want to sound unnecessarily negative, because on the positive side, we're not wasting time shuffling to hundreds of irrelevant movies to find the 10 that we're maybe interested in. And this applies to everything in our life. So actually, recommendation engines on the positive side help us a lot and save us a lot of time, and making sure we make the best out of our time. So as every powerful technology, you could see the kind of the pros and the cons. And I think especially, I don't think there is a kind of a general problem in movies, in sports, maybe in social media. We need to continue to invest more to figure out what's the right balance, and how to make sure we're not just sitting in a echo chamber, but there is enough fresh and new content that that we have access to.
Sports is one of the entertainments that creates massive communities. And can you share some tips and tricks on building communities out of your experience through FITE, and how did you grow a community over an app, and how do you
over the years, live streaming become better and better. In the early days, it was hardly working, for numerous reasons, including kind of just the ability to scale to millions and tens of millions of simultaneous users. But it's still very far from the actual experience we're having when we are at the stadium or when we are at the venue. So I think the technology has a long, long way to go to become way more immersive and to try to replicate at least better. I don't think it will ever be as if you were at the venue, but I think there's a lot more that could be done to feel more integrated into the whole experience. Part of that is the ability to communicate with other people who are around you, which is a social and kind of interactive aspect of things. The other part, of course, is just the visual experience, and things are moving towards VR, Meta, and all of that. But back to your question regarding the interactive part in the community. In our experience, probably the most important thing is to enable the ability to communicate in real time, which today is chat. And this is something that is not very new. You would see it on Twitch, you would see it on YouTube. But that's by far, that's like 90% of the engagement happens around this single simple feature. It's not simple to manage without the moderation and all of that. And when you have a million users, it's very different than you have a chat with 100 users. So it's not easy to manage, but it's not complicated as concept. And I think a big chunk of the actual engagement during live events happens around the chat feature. And we're now in the process of extending our capabilities. So we want to embed some of the other functionalities within the chat feature. Things like polls and voting and surveys and all of that, as opposed to being somewhere around the screen somewhere else. We want them to be essentially to have a player and to have a chat, and everything else interactive to happen within the chat window.
Awesome. Chat and becoming more and more like online when we want to see like sports and events. Of course, pandemic had an impact on this. Mm-hmm. How did pandemic create an effect on what FITE was doing and generally on the live music and sports events business? And how is it going to affect the future?
Essentially, it accelerated what was already happening in the industry. Since we launched FITE in 2016, only like maybe 10 to 15% of the overall consumption of pay-per-views, kind of the big high premium events, was through digital channels. Most of it was through cable and satellite. And the trend was already clear that consumers are shifting to digital. But what happened over the last 2.5 years was huge acceleration of this trend. So today, more than 50% for all of the big events is coming from digital channels, which of course is great for companies such as us that are built on this very proposition. But I think this is one of the shifts in, not so much in how we watch, but which media we use. And part of the shift to digital is related to the fact that digital became much better than what it used to be. The fact that it offers the ability to have a community, interact with the other users, all of that is not typically available on cable and satellite systems. The pandemic essentially accelerated this, and we're seeing a huge part of the engagement now happening on digital channels. And I think some of those trends are here to stay. And experts say that you need 21 days to build a new habit, and we've been 2.5 years into this new habit. So I don't see us all of a sudden not using DocuSign and not using Zoom and not watching sports online. But there's clear trend to, even if you look at the seasonality, when the weather is better and people spend more time outside, they watch less. And this doesn't apply to sports only, this applies to all of media. And it's probably a healthy thing to do. I don't think as a society we should be aiming to move consumers to spend 12 hours a day in front of a screen. So we have to also find the balance there. Obviously, each company, FITE including, has the intrinsic incentive to drive as much engagement as possible. But we need to figure out kind of above the level of a single company, what do we do to actually make sure we continue to have a relatively healthy life?
Yeah, and there's always this risk when doing these online events and streaming that something might go wrong. Did you have any major issues during events that you were streaming or making happen in real time towards your audience?
Major no, very luckily, because when we talk about some of the most high-profile events on FITE, and we streamed all of in the combat sports, all of the big names and all of the big events from Mayweather to Pacquiao to Canelo to Triple G to actually the biggest digital pay-per-view was streamed on the FITE platform exclusively. And this was Mike Tyson with Roy Jones Jr. So these are millions of simultaneous users, which requires very, very solid engineering, both in terms of scalability, so that your systems are able to handle billions of requests per second, and tens of thousands of, actually hundreds of thousands of transactions per minute, to also the reliability. So one aspect is the scalability, ability to actually handle this load, and the other aspect is reliability, making sure that every single component of the system works. And the only way that I know that this could be achieved is to have redundancy. So essentially on every single component, we use multiple vendors, we have multiple options, starting from the CDN, so we use different CDN providers. If one is down, we don't care. We use 7 different payment providers. We use for the big events 2 independent satellite downlink providers, each one with primary and backup streams, and on and on and on, to make sure that whatever happens with any of the components, we could still deliver a service to our end users, because the stakes are really high. It's not every single weekend. So on a smaller event, it would be definitely not good, but it's very different when this is a marquee event in the industry. You are the exclusive way to watch Mike Tyson or Roy Jones Jr. If something happens during this event and we're not able to deliver a good experience to a big chunk of the users, we could just shut down the company next day. For sure. I mean, we could not recover from the brand impact as well as the financial impact of something like this.
So one of the most beloved tactics for entrepreneurs, like trial and error, is not an option for you.
Yeah, it's slightly different when it comes to the kind of the back-end infrastructure. You could do try and error with many other things. Maybe some stuff on the front end, especially on the web, where you could actually relatively easy roll back things. But when it comes to the streaming infrastructure, we are very conservative, much more conservative than our usual startup.
Awesome. How do you see the product evolving? You said that something big is happening, but how do you see it evolving, let's say 5 years?
One of the aspects is related to the content. We are now at the phase where we build very strong brand within the combat sports space. We work with all of providers. We stream all of the big events. The next phase of our evolution is to replicate this success in other content verticals. So we are now going after a few of the actually more mainstream sports. So big evolution of the product will be related to that, adding more content and fine-tuning the product to other sports, because many things are common, but some are different. But the other big thing on the technology side is building that immersive experience. So going into the kind of the VR space, the meta space, Triller as a group, we are a big believer in that space. Actually, Triller is doing some very, very cool stuff that soon will be announced. So I see the FITE product also developing in the direction of providing better and more immersive experience to viewers.
Awesome. It's like just a question pops in my mind, like going back to the fact that Metallica are basically an investor in Triller.
That was great, actually.
Yeah, it's because in Bulgaria, concerts from people like Metallica were not often. I think it happened only twice for the last 25 years.
3 times, I'm not wrong. They had one early concert in
Plovdiv.
Plovdiv.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this concert, this Plovdiv is, how does a person that like knows Metallica from basically CDs and all these things feel when Metallica is backing up whatever like he has put his life and efforts and energy into?
Actually, the first cassette I bought was Metallica. So
I'm asking the right person.
Yes. Yeah, I'm a big fan of the group. And it was great. We actually did one event with them, which was the previous Triad show, with the participation of Pulev in the main card. And Metallica did a concert essentially between the fights and at the end of the show. And they saw firsthand kind of the vision that Triller is putting together for those events, the quality of the video production. We work with Nigel Lidgo, who is the producer behind American Idol and You Think You Can Dance. So some of the top people in that space are behind this show and all of the shows that we follow. So Metallica were very, very excited from all of this, and shortly after essentially joined as an investor, pre-IPO or pre-public transaction. And yeah, I'm a great fan, but I'm not the fan in the sense of how to put it. I think this also applies to, we had the opportunity to work with many celebrities during the life of FITE to date. I mean, with Dunking, with, you name it, people with a lot of, who have achieved a lot and who have been very successful in their profession, who are big influencers in their space. It's always great to meet them and to have a conversation with them and to share ideas. And it's like listening to one of those great podcasts with great people, but you could do it live and with other great, interesting people. But I'm not fan in the sense of, give me an autograph, let's take a photo together. I think everybody brings their own experience and their own value to a meeting like this. Yeah, I'm saying it shortly, I'm not very impressed by celebrities.
Yeah. No, it's just, I was talking that the influence that these people had, and now they're like backing you up, which is...
Of course. This is very exciting. And there are other big celebrities that are on our cap table. Yeah. And this is great, and it's not untypical. If you look at the UFC cap table before their IPO, they also had a lot of people from sports and music.
So it seems that you're not only hiring the right people through joint work, but you're also having some of the celebrities to back you up as investors, which is
to be honest, it was not my achievement. This was more Ryan and Bobby, the two people behind Triller.
Awesome.
And they're very, very deeply embedded in the Hollywood ecosystem, super well connected, well respected, and it's much easier for them to bring Metallica on board than it's for me.
Spectacular. Most of the people that are listening and viewing our conversation don't know that you made your first exit 20 years ago, in the dawn of the Bulgarian IT/startup.
I am that old, yes.
Have the fundamentals of what you were doing back then and doing now changed for all these years? And in what kind of way? Because you went through the dot-com bubble, then the global financial crisis. Now we go through like COVID. During the time was like rapid growth in everything digital. So what changed in the fundamentals in this period?
I don't think that there's much change in the fundamentals of building and scaling a business. Obviously, during this period of time, there were many different periods with different challenges, but a lot of the fundamentals are the same, including with respect to the exits, essentially with fundamentals or, I mean, it's not much different to sell a company today than it was 20 years ago. And to use the overused quote, companies are not being sold, they're being bought. So essentially, it's about building a company that is a significant enough player in some ecosystem that others want to be there and want to take the same space, that others think this is the best and fastest way to accelerate their growth. And this is the case regardless of if it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. I think it's the same. You have to build a valuable company that has a real value to market players if you're looking for a successful exit. And we've never, even though I did 3 exits to date, we've never ever built a company with the vision of let's exit, let's build something, and in 3 years we're out, we'll cash and then we go to Hawaii. Always, it's also probably a matter of kind of personal attitude, but it's always been about let's focus now. Now we're building this thing. We want to be with it. Who knows how long? Maybe it will be an IPO. Maybe this will be. Maybe our children will work in this company. I don't care. I'm thinking about building something meaningful. And if the opportunity arises to do a decent exit, a good exit, sure, we'll consider it.
Yeah. So you've exited 3 companies?
Correct.
And 2 universities?
Yes, very correct.
So you're like like dropping out of university doesn't mean that you cannot make very nice exits in Bulgaria too, not only in the States.
Correct. Well, people I think over-exaggerate a little bit the positive correlation between the two. We all know kind of the big examples there, but I am a believer in education. I think I stayed long enough to essentially get the most out of it, which in my case was essentially mathematics and physics, and left for the boring stuff.
What is your, you said that education is important for you, but you've left for the boring stuff. How do you keep yourself up to date, and how do you treat yourself towards new stuff in terms of technology, but not only like methods and ways of working and operating? How do you learn new things?
Professionally and specifically with respect to technology, I actually have a little bit of passion for machine learning and AI myself. So to the extent I do any coding nowadays, it's in that space. So I play a little bit with that. Also for some of actually the recommendation engine, we have a prediction engine. Some of those things were projects in which I was quite involved. Which keeps me a little bit up to date with respect to this particular niche that is a lot of interest to me. When it comes to kind of more wider college education, nowadays I mostly rely on podcasts. So I have a bunch of cool podcasts with kind of that provide a really good overview of where the science is heading. A little bit less where business is heading. I'm probably a little bit more interested in where kind of society and science are heading. And yeah, podcasts are probably the biggest medium I'm using nowadays. Of course, we are kind of reading, but more and more I'm shifting to an audio form, which is interesting. When I started several years ago, I was actually one of the people who was kind of relatively late on that train. A lot of my people were already, during their commute, were listening to tons of podcasts. I got a little bit later on that train, and initially it kind of felt weird. I mean, just the written word is just I assume it was easier for me to internalize. But nowadays it's mostly audio, and I'm increasing the speed all the time of how fast I listen.
What is your philosophy as a founder, as a leader of an organization that is paving the way for other great Bulgarian companies to go into such a great deals with companies that share values with on a global market?
I'm not a big believer of kind of differentiation between a leader and a team and somebody having to motivate someone. At the end of the day, we are, speaking of FITE, we are one team with one vision, and we either succeed together or fail together, or maybe do a little bit of both, hopefully with the overall trajectory to go towards success. And I've seen many different types of management throughout the years. I think what works for me, because I think everybody has to find what's authentic for them, and it could be very different between different people. And we've seen vastly different management styles being successful. For me, I think it's very important the kind of the honesty aspect of it. So I've never ever lied to my team and saying, we actually did great here. On the contrary, we try to be very realistic about what happened. Did we do well? Did we not? Everybody has access to all of the KPIs, including revenues, number of subscribers, purchases, you name it. Everybody has, and not only on consolidated basis, everybody has access to this data for every individual show, which is not the culture in many other companies in that space, because obviously this is valuable business information. Essentially, everybody who is in FITE knows who are the top 5 properties, sports properties, that if we lose, we'll be in a different place. But this is part of this trust, and as a manager, I feel we are kind of one team, and it feels a little bit. It feels a little bit like working with friends.
Yeah, because I'm currently listening to, of course, the Principles by Ray Dalio, and there's this radical transparency that you were just mentioning now.
We're not there yet. So salaries are not transparent.
Yeah.
Because as you know, there are companies who go even more than that. Yeah. So we're transparent with respect to what's happening to the business. Yeah. But when it comes to the relationship between the company and each individual contributor, this is still transparent, not transparent, and it's confidential. We have considered going even further, but I see some negatives when it comes to, it's kind of revealing a little bit of personal information. How much is each one valued should be something between the company and themselves. It doesn't have to be public, because this is not only company information, this is also private information. Yeah,
I was more or less aiming at the way that people feel motivated by having skin in the game, literally knowing that if something goes wrong in these 5 events, like it can happen overnight. So is this like a tool that you've seen that motivates people to do, like always do their best, or like keep challenging their perception of what is possible and keep doing better and better?
I believe so. I believe honesty and transparency and being candid with the team goes a long way, because we work with super intelligent people. They know when you're trying to essentially manipulate them. They know when there's us versus them. They know when you are trying to get the most out of their hours in the company. It's a very different environment when you have the feeling that you're building something together. You trust them enough to essentially share everything business-wise. I do feel it's an important part of our specific culture. And I think it's also, evolutionary speaking, it also has competitive advantages. Because I've also seen cultures where if you're not transparent, it's hard to understand even the numbers and what didn't go well. And it's hard to correct your course, and it's hard to analyze actually the implications of what the company is doing so that you could do better next time. So in terms of building the culture to always improve, I think one of the fundamental aspects is to actually share openly the information and try to do unbiased analysis, even of ideas. I don't care if the idea is coming from me or the idea is coming from whoever it is coming. At least I try. We're human, and obviously we have our own biases, but at least I do my best to put all those things aside and see, is this a good idea? Do the rest of the team think this is a good idea? Can we do an A/B test to actually really know if this is a good idea or not? Or maybe we are in our own echo chamber.
Yeah, it sounds like you treat the team as a family, and it seems like a philosophy coming out of like family type relationship.
Oh, I have way more arguments with my family. So luckily I don't treat the team as a family exactly, but I treat them as friends.
Great. Awesome. Talking about France, of course, you share a building in Sofia with Payhawk, the first Bulgarian unicorn, hopefully the first of many. And do you see and do you expect any spillover effects from their massive, massive success?
For sure. And there are already a few startups that are on the same trajectory. And I believe, as well as you do, that there will be more to follow in the kind of the unicorn space. And this has the effect to essentially fuel the ecosystem with energy, because more and more young people are seeing that this could actually happen from Bulgaria. So we'll see more of the top people trying to do something in that space, in the startup space. And if they fail, that's also great. I mean, that's great experience, and I don't think that anybody would regret. And we're also seeing the impact on how foreign investors, the big foreign investors, are looking at our region. So it will become, the more successes we are able to show as a region, the easier and easier it will get to get the attention of the big guys. It's getting easier in terms of the relationships and experience that our VCs are building through those successful companies. So it's becoming easier for them to recognize the next unicorn and support it throughout their path, and then bring the next round investors and all of that. So I think it has huge spillover effect.
Are there ways that we can support actively this, let's say, place for like breeding unicorns? Is there things that we can do as a society, as a ecosystem that can help the follow-up?
For sure.
Unicorns?
And this is exactly what you're doing with the podcasts, showing those good examples and kind of having the opportunity to talk with the founders of Payhawk and kind of all the other great companies out there. And this is part of the things that are, again, creating this energy in the society to continue to do those things and to do it even bigger and more successful, and to actually ultimately brand Bulgaria as a super successful place for some of the next generation companies, if you wish. There are also many things that entrepreneurs are able to do to support the environment, from supporting other entrepreneurs with contacts, ideas. Sometimes it's just talking to someone who is having the same challenges or who has had the same challenges. Could sparkle some interesting ideas. So just, I think the successful entrepreneurs almost have the responsibility to dedicate enough of their time to spend with anybody who is on that route and wants to talk to them. From entrepreneurs joining as LPs in the VC, so that actually the ecosystem follows this kind of the Silicon Valley model. So once you do a successful exit, then part of the way you return back to the ecosystem is through the VC funds, or maybe directly angel investor. Either way is fine. So that you could essentially support and help the next generation entrepreneurs.
Awesome. Yeah, you're pointing towards two things that are very important for me, like the personal example in the first place, and the second one is like paying back towards the community that supported you and educated you and helped you. So funny story that 20 years ago, me and Hristo Borisov from Payhawk, we were just playing football together in a football team in Druzhba, which is a neighborhood in Sofia. And 20 years later, here he is, like leading the forefront towards like the first of many Bulgarian unicorns, which is amazing. And thank you very much for having this mindset. And it was just simply amazing way that you put it together. The final question that we go towards now is from the perspective that you're having now and everything that you have achieved, but of course everything that's coming towards you in the coming years. What would you like to be remembered for, Kosta?
I don't have that kind of, I obviously have ego, but not that kind of ego where I want to be remembered 200 years from now. I think actually this is a very, very high bar for anybody to put out there. I think I'm a little bit more down to earth, so I try to have hopefully positive impact to the people around me and not thinking that much about my legacy.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kosta Jordanov, for being on the podcast. Thank you for sharing your amazing story and your experience. And Can't wait for the future successes of FITE and Triller.
Thank you.
In the next episode of the Recursive podcast, we welcome Radoslav Georgiev, co-founder and CTO of the OKRs management software company GTM Hub.
You would always have some vague idea of a problem, and you would say, okay, my intuition tells me that this is happening because such and such, and this is what we can do to improve it. But if you don't back this with data, it's just opinions. So this is where our platform came into play to actually either disprove your hypothesis or validate it and give you the means on executing on it.
And if you are just as passionate about innovation as we are, hit subscribe for the Recursive podcast on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform. We're everywhere.